Hi, welcome to Journaling Together. Today it's just Jen, and so I'm going to be talking today about reading journals. A few months ago, we set up my reading journal, and today we're going to look at how would you, or how do I, use my reading journal. So let's look at the types of pages that I've put in my reading journal and talk about how I use them. So the first one here is, first tab, is the index. So the index is, once I get all of my page numbers into my book, the index is in there intended to keep track of all of the things that are in the book in a way that's easy to find things when I need to. Why would you need to find things? Yeah, you might want to revisit your reviews, but at the same time, I don't just keep reviews of books in here. I also have lists of things and different kinds of lists. So let's talk about those. So I keep lists of book recommendations, books that I want to read, lists of what might be sitting on my bedside table if I had a pile of books to read. So lots of different kinds of lists. These are to be read, but I also keep, that's not the right tab. I also keep lists that are, my goodness, I forgot to mark this one, I think. Here's an example of one. Lists that come from other people that are like suggested reading lists. So this was a suggested reading list of books to get started in philosophy. So I took this list from, I think, a YouTube channel and wrote it down so that if I ever wanted to get started in philosophy, I could do that. The next type of thing that I put into my reading journal are reviews of books that I have read. And there are I use different types of reviews for different types of books. This is an example of a fiction book that I read. It's a tween fiction, what do you call that? For middle school type reading. This is that kind of book. And I was testing it out for a possible homeschool study for us. And so I read the book and I wrote down my impressions of the book. In this case, the only thing I did were my general impressions and how I felt about the book. I didn't have any in-depth literary analysis or criticisms, but let me show you a book where I did have that. So here is a book that I recently read with our book club, and I wrote down all my thoughts on the book, my initial thoughts, my initial reactions, but nothing really in depth. If I read about, or if I wanted to recommend the book to someone really quickly, these are the pages I would visit. But then I thought about, well, what were the themes of the book? What were some of my thoughts on the book as I went through? And so I wrote down themes over here. And then I might write down my criticisms or my praises of the book. And in this case, and getting very specific, in this case, I had some problems with some of the references in the setting. I thought it was odd that, for example, they said that they were having to call people to come pick up their campers from camp early, but it was taking them a long time because they only had 2 landlines. But the book was set in, I believe, 1975. Between 1960 and 1975, and in this incident was in 1975. We didn't call them landlines in 1975 because landlines were all we had. So we just called them telephone lines. So that's one thing that stood out to me, and I wrote that down. So these are the specifics of what I did or did not like about the book. Now, another kind of book that I might put into my reading journal are books that are nonfiction, but specifically nonfiction books that are meant to be instructional. They'll be reviewed differently from some other types of nonfiction books. Now, when I'm writing reviews of this kind of book, oftentimes I'm writing down page numbers. And so I always make sure that I write down not just the title and the author, but I try to write down the publication information as well, so that if it were a library book or a book that didn't belong to me and I needed to return, I could always go back to and find a copy of that version of the book in order to see the context of a quote that I might have written down. But because this book is instructional in its nature, when I make my notes in my reading journal, I take notes as if I am preparing to teach the information from the book to a class or to someone else. Because, as they always say, if you can teach what you've learned, then you've truly learned it. And in this case, I actually did teach it, because this book is a book that I read and then I discussed with my husband and told him about what was in the book. And now we use some of the skills that I learned from this book. The last kind of nonfiction book that I have in here is a book that is mostly for edification. So this book is not something that I'm going to read to be able to teach. It's not instructional in an academic manner. It could be instructional, but it's more for your own understanding. So this book, again, I made sure to include the title, the author, and the publication information, because I include a lot of page numbers. And I wanted to make sure that I could go back and consult those, especially for the greater context. So here I'm going to write out all of my favorite quotes first. And in this case, I have a few pages of it. And then I'm going to do what I call engaging with the text. And that's where I take a quote and then I write my response to it as if I weren't reading the book, but the author were actually telling me how they felt instead of writing a book. And then I was having a conversation with them. And so I have several pages of this in this book, or in this journal. And then when I get to the end, I actually do write my thoughts on the book. This is more of, well, where was my head when I finished reading this book? Why did I pick up this book? Would I recommend this book to someone else? What type of person would I recommend this book to? And those kinds of things. Now you can see that I've interspersed all of these different types of pages throughout the book. That's why I have an index. But you can never know when you're going to, how many pages you're going to need or such things. And I have an example of that back here. I had started reviewing the 12-week year and then discovered that I wanted to write down this list of books to get started in philosophy. Unfortunately, I didn't leave myself enough pages when I did that, and so I had to tip in a few more extra pages. So if you make that mistake, you could also just glue in a few pages right into the inside spine, and that can cover the pages that you needed for the book review that you wanted to finish. I hope that this has been helpful and that you might consider your own reading journal. This has been Journaling Together, and I'm Jen.